straight after the scene in which the witch's prophecies so affected Macbeth that he's now considering killing his king, comes his first meeting with that king, King Duncan. How will he behave in front of Duncan? And will Duncan notice that his downfall is in the offing? That's what we find out in Act 1, Scene 4 of Macbeth. Now let's remember, in this scene we've got Duncan, who's absolutely delighted with Macbeth because Macbeth's this great hero who's just seen off the Scottish rebels. And so Duncan is full of admiration and praise for Macbeth. But then we've got Macbeth, who's just met the witches, who's just heard that he's going to become the Thane of Cawdor, that he's going to become the king. So we've got this difference in what they both know. So of course that creates a situation for dramatic irony. Remember, dramatic irony is when the audience knows something that one or more of the characters doesn't know. And here we know something that Duncan doesn't know. We know that Macbeth is plotting to take his life. And so that puts us in a position of power, but it also puts the king, King Duncan, in a position of vulnerability. Knowledge is power, and he doesn't have that knowledge that this Thane of his, this guy who he thinks is really noble, is planning to kill him. So it really shows you the vulnerability even of a king when somebody is planning something against them. If you don't know that you're being plotted against, you could be in danger. Shakespeare was writing Macbeth probably in 1606, and it was most likely performed during 1606 to the king. And the king was new on the throne. He'd only been there since 1603. And in fact, he'd survived an assassination attempt the previous year in November 1605, the 5th of November 1605, which you all know as Bonfire Night, precisely because of this assassination attempt, which James I survived. And this was carried out by Guy Fawkes and some conspirators who were Catholics. They had been thinking that when James I came to the throne, he would be a kinder king to them than Elizabeth I was a queen to them. She relentlessly persecuted the Catholics. And James I came along, and Catholics thought, he's going to be better for us, particularly because they knew that James I's mother, Mary Queen of Scots, had been a devout Catholic. So they were hoping for a better time under James I. But it quickly became obvious that he was going to be a solid, strong and merciless Protestant king following on from Elizabeth I before him. He wasn't going to show mercy to the Catholics. So these conspirators were furious and they plotted to take his life. And they might have been successful, except for the fact that the king was tipped off. And so the Gunpowder Plot, as it came to be known, never came to fruition. The barrels of gunpowder underneath the Houses of Parliament were never blown up. Now, Guy Fawkes, one of these conspirators, was by all accounts a very handsome guy. You'd never have thought that he was going to plot to kill his king, and yet he did. And so this scene is very interesting if you consider all that historical context and thinking about how someone who looks nice, who looks like they're a good guy, might actually be plotting something. And with the play being performed in 1606, perhaps it's a kind of warning from Shakespeare to the king himself, or a commentary at least from Shakespeare, that you can't spot someone who's conspiring to take your life. In fact, right at the beginning of Act 1, Scene 4, when the king, Duncan, comes onto the stage and he's talking about the old Thane of Cawdor who betrayed him, he makes this philosophical comment that you really can't tell who's plotting something against you when he says, "There's no art to find the mind's construction in the face. He was a gentleman on whom I built an absolute trust." You see there, Duncan says you can't judge someone by the way they look. I completely trusted him and I was wrong. Brilliantly then, Shakespeare brings in Macbeth in the very next moment. And the first thing that Duncan says to him is, "O worthiest cousin." That superlative, worthiest, shows you the high esteem in which Duncan holds Macbeth. He doesn't suspect him at all. There's that dramatic irony I was talking about earlier on. We know that Macbeth is plotting. The king himself doesn't have a clue. And it's brilliant, that juxtaposition between his comments on, oh, you can't judge anybody from the way they look, and then immediately judging Macbeth as being the worthiest cousin. It really shows you and brings home this fact that there's no telling who's up to what. Most of the rest of the scene is a yawn fest of sycophancy, with Duncan and Macbeth vying to outdo each other in how much they can brown-nose each other. Macbeth says everything you would expect from a noble looking up respectfully to his king. He's polite, he says all the right things, he doesn't give anything away. Duncan, in his turn, is completely grateful and gracious towards his loyal subject, and he says, I'm laying out the path for your progress. So there's this real sense of good manners and good behaviour, fair play between them. A key moment in the development of the plot is when Duncan announces that he's going to make his eldest son Malcolm the heir to the throne and gives him the title Prince of Cumberland, which traditionally was the title that the heir to the Scottish throne got. Macbeth hears that and then immediately he starts plotting. And again, we hear an aside. Now, as we were talking about in Act 1, Scene 3, an aside is a dramatic device in which the audience can hear what the character is thinking, but it's taken as read that none of the other characters on the stage can hear what that character is thinking. So it gives us this opportunity to see into Macbeth's head again. If anything, it's an even darker place than it was in Act 1, Scene 3, because no sooner has he heard about Malcolm becoming the Prince of Cumberland than he says, "The Prince of Cumberland, that is a step on which I must fall down or else leap, for in my way it lies. Stars, hide your fires, let not light see my black and deep desires. The eye wink at the hand, yet let that be which the eye fears when it is done to see." Let's just spend a moment thinking in a bit more depth about that speech. It's the key speech of the scene. It's got some brilliant lines in it. Let's talk about it. So what's he actually saying here? Well, he's saying that he's going to have to get rid of the Prince of Cumberland, Malcolm, to get to the throne. So he's immediately plotting. No sooner said than the plot comes into his head again. This time, though, it seems even darker than in Act 1, Scene 3, when he said and he admitted that his hair was on end, his heart was beating fast, he wasn't sure what to think or feel. Now he seems colder. He seems more calculating. He says the Prince of Cumberland is a step. In fact, that's really calculating and, quite frankly, inhumane, isn't it? He doesn't say this is Malcolm. He says that this is a step. He uses the metaphor of a step that he's got to overleap. That really shows how he's starting to think of Malcolm as an obstacle in his way, or to think of other humans as an obstacle in his way to the throne. He doesn't humanise them. In fact, that's so deep into his mind that a couple of lines later he says, "For in my way it lies." He doesn't say he is in my way. He says it is in my way. He's completely dehumanised Malcolm there. So you can see this thing that you would expect from someone who's going to become a murderer, which is this attempt to turn the ones they're going to murder into objects rather than humans, to sort of build themselves up towards the murder. And that carries on in the speech where he starts to build himself up even more towards the murder. And he makes this very dark, villainous speech, which an early modern audience, a Jacobean audience, would really be thinking, this is the kind of speech you would expect from a villain. There's hundreds of examples of this kind of speech in the drama of this period. And it's characterised by, these very dark images and these evil thoughts. I like to call these speeches a night piece, the kind of speech that comes before a deed of blood. Actually, there's a few of them in the first and the second act. It's the villain's piece as he's building towards the crime he's going to commit. And look how villainous it is. Stars, hide your fires. Let not light see my black and deep desires. Now, in a literal sense, he's saying he doesn't want the stars to be out because he doesn't want anything light to see what he's going to do. Perhaps he's hoping for a cloudy night on which to commit the crime. But in a much more metaphorical sense, if we think of the stars, they're up there and they're in the heavens. The Jacobean audience would have called those the heavens up there. And so the stars are sort of connected with God, really, as is light. Yeah, let not light see my black and deep desires. If you think about the significance of light in the Bible, you know, phrases from the Bible such as the light shines in the darkness and the darkness has not overcome it. Light in the Bible and in the early modern period is associated with hope, with spirituality, with God. So what he's really saying is he doesn't want anything light, including God and any spiritually good figure, to see his black and deep desires. Look at the word black there for the Jacobeans. That would be associated with evil. He recognises he's got these evil desires and he wants them to be covered up. Then he says something even more psychologically interesting when he says, the eye wink at the hand, yet let that be which the eye fears when it is done to see. And what he's saying there is he doesn't want to look at what he's going to do, but he wants to do it. Look at the way he dissociates himself from the act he's contemplating. First of all, he doesn't call it his eye. He kind of sees it as this kind of disembodied eye. So immediately he dissociates it from himself. And he says the same thing about his hand. He doesn't call it his hand, the hand he talks about. And if we see the eye as the organ of knowledge and understanding, you know, you look at something, you see it, you understand it, then what he's really saying is, I don't want to look at or acknowledge or understand what my hand is going to do. So I don't want to know about what my hand is going to do. That's really psychologically interesting, isn't it? Dissociating himself from his actions, already preparing mentally for being able to deal with this crime that he's planning to commit. So it's all incredibly evil to the Jacobean audience. It's all too much, isn't it? And in fact, the word he uses early in the speech when he says that this is a step he's got to overleap is a really interesting word. Overleap means he's got to jump over this step. But the prefix over already makes you think of this concept, this literary character, the Overreacher. An overreacher is someone like Icarus in the Greek myth Daedalus and Icarus, who flies too close to the sun. He reaches beyond what he should do as a human, and, you know, the wax in his wings melts and he falls into the sea and he dies. That's an overreacher going too far. And here, Macbeth wants to overleap, but we see an overreacher, a man who is too ambitious, a man who is plotting to kill his king. And the Jacobeans would certainly see that. So that over prefix really links to this idea of his ambition of going too far. The whole speech sounds quite similar to speech by the witches. Look at the rhyming couplets he uses. No other human has used rhyming couplets in this play. He says, step, leap, fires, desires, be, see. You know, 3 rhyming couplets in a row. He's sounding like the witches when they were casting their spells. Also, there are these heavy plosives, black and deep desires, the b sound, the d sound, the plosive alliteration of the 2 does create this very heavy, disturbing, destructive tone to his speech as well. So it's all incredibly dark. But the dramatic irony continues because to those watching on, which is Duncan and Banquo, he appears to be a fantastic guy, and they comment, true worthy Banquo, he is full so valiant. It is a peerless kinsman. He's a really brave guy. He's a peerless kinsman. There's nobody as good as him. That's the last line of the scene. So Duncan doesn't see this plotting at all. And to make that line the last line hammers home the point, doesn't it? You know, Duncan thinks he's great, But we know that he's plotting in his asides the assassination of Duncan. And again, it brings us back to the Witchers from Act 1, Scene 1, with their words, fair is foul and foul is fair, still hovering and echoing in our minds. Everything in this scene appears fair, appears wonderful. The interactions between the nobleman and the king, everything looks great. But on the inside, it's darkness, it's corruption, it's hiding what he's going to do from God and hiding it from himself. So the corruption is running amok within Macbeth, but nobody recognises it.